In the year 1871, the town of Kilkenny in Ireland moved with the rhythm of church bells, market chatter, and the creak of horse carts over cobbled streets. It was a place where whispers traveled faster than the carriages, where secrets never stayed buried for long, and where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. The houses were close, stone walls damp from the endless mist, chimneys coughing out smoke that clung low in the air. Life here appeared simple, bound by faith, family, and the unspoken rules of a small community. Yet beneath the surface, there was an unease, a fragile stillness that felt ready to break. In one of those narrow streets, a child grew up with wide eyes that noticed far more than they should have. Catherine Doyle was not like other children. While others ran wild in the fields or skipped rope on uneven stones, she sat quietly, listening, always listening. People often said she carried herself with an odd seriousness for her age, as though she bore the weight of knowledge too heavy for her small frame. Initially, no one paid much attention to this. Children sometimes seemed peculiar, and most outgrew it. But there was something different about Catherine. Her words often startled people, as if she had reached into their private thoughts and pulled out things they had never spoken aloud. The Doyle family, like many in Kilkenny, lived modestly. Her father worked long hours in a local tannery, a job that stained his hands and lungs, while her mother carried the burdens of the home. They had little money, but their house, though plain, held warmth. Catherine was their only child, the center of her mother's world, though not without worry. Her mother often glanced at her with quiet fear, as if sensing that something about her daughter set her apart from the rest. Neighbors noticed it too. A child who should have known nothing of certain thing, as spoke them aloud in a voice clear and certain. Once, when a neighbor passed by, Catherine had looked up and calmly told the woman about her dead sister, speaking of her as though she had known her personally. The woman, shocked and pale, hurried away without a word. Small things like that began to spread, turning the girl into a figure of uneasy fascination. Some whispered God touched her. Others said it was the devil's mark. Most simply shook their heads and avoided meeting her gaze. On the surface, life in Kilkenny went on as it always had. The markets filled with the smell of bread and meat, children shouted in the streets, and priests gave sermons about sin and salvation. But behind closed doors there were secrets. Men carried guilt in their silence. Women bore their pain in quiet endurance, and families clung to their reputations as if their very lives depended on it. In such a town, where honor and shame walked hand in hand, words had power, and Catherine's words, careless, innocent, yet cutting, had begun to feel dangerous. One man in particular found himself watching her more closely than others. He was not yet known for the role he would come to play, but there was something about him that revealed itself slowly. The way he observed people, how he measured every word before he spoke, and how his charm seemed to carry a weight behind it. Outwardly, he appeared respectable, someone trusted, someone who moved easily between households with a smile that disarmed suspicion. But behind that smile was ambition, and a hunger for control that only deepened when he realized what Catherine could do. For Catherine, there was no malice in her words. She never understood why people recoiled from the things she said. To her, it was simply the truth, as natural as breathing. But to the grown men and women around her, it was unsettling, terrifying even. She was a child who could pull hidden things into the light, secrets meant to stay locked away. And in a time when reputation meant everything, when a single rumor could destroy a family, her gift, or curse, was something that could not be ignored. The Doyle household began to feel the strain. Her father, exhausted from his work, brushed off the rumors as nonsense. But even he flinched at the things his daughter said. Her mother prayed more, candles burning late into the night, whispering prayers for protection and guidance. Catherine, sensing the fear but not understanding it, grew more isolated, left to wander the boundaries of her small world with thoughts too large for her years. It was during these months that the air in Kilkenny seemed to change. Stories of strange happenings in nearby villages filtered in. Children seeing things in the dark, animals turning restless, shadows where none should be. People spoke of curses, of sins being punished, of spirits unsettled. And always, when such tales reached Kilkenny, eyes turned, however briefly, toward Catherine Doyle. The world she lived in was not yet broken, but cracks had begun to form. She was still just a girl, innocent in so many ways, but the town was already writing her into a darker story. Beneath the ordinary days and routines, there was the hum of tension like a thread pulled too tight, waiting to snap. Those who watched her felt it, even if they could not name it. Something was coming, something that would tear open the fragile quiet of Kilkenny and leave scars that would never fully heal. The first signs of strain began quietly, like cracks spreading through old plaster. At first, no one wanted to admit that the Doyle girl was becoming a problem. She was still a child, after all, and children sometimes spoke strangely. But the more she talked, the harder it became to dismiss. Her words carried too much weight, too much accuracy, and they always seemed to cut directly into the parts of people's lives they fought hardest to keep hidden. One afternoon at the market, Catherine spoke aloud of a merchant's debts, naming the man who had threatened to seize his land. She said it so plainly, without hesitation, as though she had overheard it whispered in her own home. The merchant froze, his face turning pale, then red, as other traders stared. He forced a laugh, tried to wave her words away as nonsense, but whispers spread through the stalls. By nightfall, everyone was talking about his failing business, and the man's anger burned as hot as his shame. He never forgot the child who had revealed his weakness, and from then on, he watched her with resentment. Incidents like this multiplied. A woman Catherine barely knew came to the Doyle home, trembling, asking if her husband was unfaithful. Catherine had never seen the man before, yet she described him, his manner, his habits, even the name of a tavern he visited. The woman fled in tears, and soon after, the Doyle family began to feel the cold edge of gossip pressing against them. Neighbors stopped visiting. Invitations never came. Even those who pitted Catherine's parents chose distance over kindness. Among those who watched from the shadows was the man who would become most deeply entwined in her fate. He was older, respected in town, with a reputation for being clever, persuasive, and unusually skilled at winning people's trust. Some said he could talk his way into or out of anything. To him, Catherine was not a strange child to be pitted, but a force that unsettled the delicate balance of control he worked so hard to maintain. He lived on people's silence, their need to conceal, their dependence on his counsel. A child who spoke secrets no one should know, was a danger to everything he built. First, he tried to charm her. He visited the Doyle home under the pretense of friendship, always with gifts or polite words. He knelt to her level, asking her simple questions. Catherine would look at him in silence, sometimes answering in short bursts, sometimes saying things that made his smile falter. Once, she told him he carried a sin he had never confessed, and though she didn't say more, his face darkened. He laughed it off in front of her parents, but later that night, he lay awake, turning her words over and over. She could not possibly know, yet she had said it with such certainty. As his unease grew, so did his obsession. He began speaking against her quietly, planting seeds of doubt among townsfolk. He warned others that the girl was dangerous, that such knowledge could not be natural, that perhaps the devil himself was guiding her tongue. In a town bound tightly by religion, where fear of sin and damnation lingered in every sermon, such whispers carried weight. Catherine's mother noticed the way women clutched their children closer when her daughter walked by, the way men crossed themselves when she entered a room. The family's isolation deepened, and Catherine grew lonelier, wandering the narrow lanes with only silence for company. At home, tension brewed. Her father's patience thinned under the weight of rumors. He began to snap at his wife, blaming her prayers and constant worry for drawing attention to the child's oddness. Catherine, sensing the distance, grew more withdrawn, yet her words did not stop. She spoke without meaning harm, but every revelation pulled the family further into the town's disfavor. One evening, she told her father that the tannery owner was planning to replace him with a younger man. Weeks later, the news proved true. Though her father never accused her outright, the way he looked at her changed. There was fear in his eyes now, hidden behind anger. The man who watched her, the one who saw both danger and opportunity, began to weave his influence more carefully. He reminded others that the church had long taught about false prophets and the dangers of unnatural gifts. He spoke softly, always reasonable, but his words carried venom. To some, he suggested Catherine might bring ruin to their town. To others, he hinted she was being used by her family for attention or gain. Every conversation chipped away at the Doyle family's fragile standing, until their name was whispered with unease rather than respect. Beneath these growing suspicions lay other currents. Financial struggles gnawed at families. Failed harvests left many hungry, and the tannery, the brewery, and the market all tightened their grip on workers who could not afford to lose wages. In a place where survival was already difficult, Catherine's strange power added another layer of fear. People resented her for speaking truths they had no control over, for pulling the thin fabric of their lives apart when it was already fraying. For the man plotting in the shadows, these hardships were tools. He knew desperation made people pliable, that fear made them easy to steer. He had spent years cultivating influence over tea. Those around him, but Catherine threatened it all. He saw in her both a danger and a chance to strengthen his hold. If she could be silenced or discredited, he would stand even taller in the eyes of the town. Meanwhile, Catherine's mother began to notice her daughter changing. She seemed restless, her sleep broken by strange dreams she would not explain. She often woke crying, yet when asked, she only shook her head. Her mother grew desperate, lighting more candles, kneeling longer at night, praying for protection. The more she prayed, the more she felt the walls closing in. She feared both the town and her own husband's growing distance, afraid that even he might one day turn against their child. The atmosphere in Kilkenny thickened. Markets grew quieter when Catherine walked past. Children, once eager to play, now avoided her, their parents warning them in hushed tones. The girl who once spoke innocently now carried an aura of menace, not by her own doing, but by the fear projected onto her. Her very presence stirred unease, and that unease was carefully fed by the man who knew how to twist fear into power. In the Doyle home, arguments rose more often. Her father's voice carried through thin walls, his frustration spilling out in harsh words. Catherine, though silent during these outbursts, seemed to retreat further into herself. Her mother tried to shield her, but even she began to break under the weight of it all. She loved her daughter, yet deep inside, she too wondered, what if the whispers were true? What if God had not blessed her child, but cursed her? The balance was breaking. The Doyle family was no longer part of the town, but set apart, marked. And in that isolation, Catherine became more vulnerable than ever. The man who had taken an interest in her now found doors open to his whispers. He needed no proof, only a suggestion. The people of Kilkenny, already burdened by hunger, debt, and their own hidden sins, wanted someone to blame. Catherine gave them a face for their fears, a scapegoat, and so the tension coiled tighter. Every careless word Catherine spoke was twisted into evidence. Every strange look became a sign. The more she tried to live as an ordinary child, the more extraordinary she appeared in the eyes of others. The Doyle family's world had begun to crumble, and though no blood had yet been spilled, it was only a matter of time before suspicion, fear, and ambition turned into something far more dangerous. The night it happened was heavy with rain. The cobblestones glistened under weak lantern light, the gutters carrying streams of muddy water that smelled of smoke and waste. Kilkenny was a town that often fell quiet after dusk, but that night the silence carried a different weight, as though the air itself had tightened. The Doyle house, small and cramped, sat like a shadow among other shadows, its windows flickering with candlelight. Inside, the air was thick with dampness, with the faint smell of tallow and boiled cabbage, with the tension of VO. Ices raised too often in recent weeks. Catherine sat in the corner of the main room, her knees tucked up, staring at the floorboards as her parents argued again. Her father's voice was sharp, fueled by weariness and something darker, something close to shame. Her mother's words rose in defense, trembling yet desperate. At the center of it all was the child, who did not speak this time, though she had spoken earlier that day in the market. Words that spread like fire, words about a man's secret affair. The man she had exposed had not taken it quietly. He had stormed into whispers, and those whispers had been gathered, shaped, sharpened into something dangerous by the one who had been watching her for so long. That man came to their door that evening. He was calm when he arrived, calm in a way that made the room colder. He was a friend to her father, or so he said, a man of standing, a man who carried the weight of reason. He had come under the guise of concern, speaking of Catherine, of the unrest her words had caused, of the danger she brought not only to herself but to them all. He told her parents that the town was reaching a breaking point, that something had to be done. His words slid like oil, soothing and poisonous at once. Her mother clutched Catherine close, shaking her head, insisting the child meant no harm. But the man leaned forward, his eyes glinting with something Catherine could not name. He spoke of sin, of the devil's whispers through innocent mouths, of how God himself would demand action if they did not take it first. And in her father's eyes, weary and burning with shame, a flicker of agreement appeared. The rain outside grew harder, rattling the shutters, drowning the sound of Catherine's sudden, small voice. She had whispered something then, something that stopped the man mid-sentence. Her words were too soft for her parents to hear, but he heard them. His face twisted, his calm cracking just for a heartbeat. She had spoken of something buried deep inside him, something he had hidden all his life. And in that moment, his mask slipped, and the room filled with something raw and dangerous. The crime itself unfolded quickly, yet every second seemed stretched, burned into memory with excruciating clarity. The man rose from his chair, his voice rising for the first time, harsh, commanding. He spoke of curses, of the child's danger, of the need to end it before it spread further. Her father tried to hold him back, but the weakness of doubt already gripped him. Catherine's mother screamed, clutching her daughter, refusing to let her go. The man's hands, once so carefully measured in gesture, now turned violent. The struggle filled the small room. A chair toppled. The candle guttered, throwing wild shadows on the walls. Catherine cried out, not words this time, but a sound of terror that pierced through everything. Her mother fought desperately, nails scratching, voice breaking, but she was no match. The man's fury was greater than reason, greater than restraint. In his mind, he was not murdering a child. He was saving his town, preserving his power, cleansing what he believed to be evil. Every strike was fueled by fear disguised as righteousness. When it was done, the silence was unbearable. Catherine lay still, her small body crumpled, her eyes staring wide though they no longer saw. Her mother collapsed over her, sobbing so violently that it shook the floorboards. Her father stood frozen, hands trembling, face ashen, caught between disbelief and guilt. The man stood above them, breathing hard, his chest heaving, his eyes bright with a madness that looked almost like triumph. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Her mother's cries carried out into the storm, but the rain swallowed them. Her father begged for reason, begged the man to leave, to undo what could not be undone. The man, regaining his composure, spoke coldly of necessity. He told them no one would believe their child had died without reason. He warned that if word spread, the family would be branded destroyed. He promised to help them if they kept silent. He promised to protect them from the town's wrath, but only if they pretended Catherine had been taken by illness or vanished into the night. Her mother refused, choking on grief, shaking her head over and over. But her father, broken and beaten by fear, could not resist the man's sway. His mind, already fragile from shame and exhaustion, clung to the lie as a way out. He agreed to bury the truth, to bury his daughter quietly, to say nothing of what had really happened. The man, now calm once more, took charge. He ordered Catherine's body hidden, speaking as though this were a simple matter of duty. His hands, which had just taken life, now worked with cold efficiency. Her father followed, numb, moving like a ghost. Her mother, hysterical, was silenced by force, her screams muffled against her husband's chest. The house smelled of tallow and rain and death. The rain outside washed the streets clean, but inside, the stain remained, unseen yet unshakable. In that moment, the Doyle family was destroyed, not just by the death of their child, but by the silence that followed. Their home, once filled with warmth, had become a tomb of secrets. The crime was not only the killing of Catherine Doyle, but the betrayal that followed. Her parents, broken, allowed themselves to be bound by fear and manipulation. The man who had taken her life left their house with dry hands and steady breath, certain he had done what was needed, certain the town would never know. But Catherine's eyes, staring wide in death, would haunt them all. The storm carried on through the night, as if the heavens themselves tried to wash away what had been done. Yet no amount of rain could cleanse it. The silence in Kilkenny grew heavier, waiting for the moment when truth, like all secrets, would force its way to the surface. The morning after Catherine's death was still and gray, the storm having left the streets slick and silent. In the Doyle house, there was no sound except for the slow crackle of a dying fire and the hollow rhythm of grief. Her mother had not moved from where she had collapsed the night before, her body curled over the space where her daughter had lain. Her sobs had long since given way to silence, her eyes swollen and distant. Her father moved like a man half dead himself, pacing the floor, wringing his hands until they were raw. Every creak of the board seemed to echo Catherine's voice in his mind. The man who had killed her returned that morning, calm and composed, as though he had slept without disturbance. He spoke with authority, instructing them on what must be done. He said Catherine's death could not be spoken of, not in truth. The town would never understand. They would call the family cursed, perhaps even complicit. Their lives would be over. He told them they must bury her quietly and speak only of illness, a fever that came suddenly and stole her away. Her father, hollowed by fear, nodded numbly. Her mother, unable to comprehend such coldness, tried to fight back, insisting that the truth must be told. But her words broke against their walls of shame and control. That afternoon, Catherine was lowered into the ground without ceremony. No priest, no blessing, no gathering of neighbors. Just 3 figures in the damp earth, shovels biting into mud, a child's body wrapped and hidden as though it were something shameful. Her mother collapsed again, clawing at the soil, begging her daughter not to be left in the dark. Her father pulled her away, though his hands shook so violently he could barely hold her. The man, efficient and wordless, finished the burial, his face set with grim purpose. When the family emerged days later with their story, the town accepted it easily on the surface. Children died, often in those years, fevers, infections, accidents. Death was no stranger to Kilkenny. Yet with Catherine, there was unease. Too many had heard her strange words. Too many had seen the way she unsettled people. Some believed the Doyle story, but others whispered. Had God finally silenced the girl himself? Had her strange gift consumed her? The explanation spread, but none carried comfort. Catherine's absence left a gap, a haunting silence in the streets where she once stood, voicing truths no one wanted to hear. Her mother withered. She moved through the days like a shadow, speaking little, her prayers louder now, frantic, as though she could still reach Catherine if she begged hard enough. She lit candles until her fingers blistered, her rosary worn smooth from her grip. Her grief ate her alive, turning her into something frail and brittle. The neighbors who saw her crossing the street averted their eyes, unable to bear the sight of a mother carrying a loss so heavy it bent her body. Her father threw himself into his work, though he worked without spirit. He labored until his hands bled, coming home stinking of tannery chemicals, collapsing without speaking. But no matter how much he tried to bury himself in labor, the guilt followed him. At night, he dreamed of his daughter's face, pale and watching, her lips moving soundlessly. He woke drenched in sweat, gasping, yet never found the strength to tell anyone the truth. His silence became his prison. The man who had committed the act moved through Kilkenny unchanged, or so it seemed. He carried himself with the same confidence, still speaking with influence, still weaving his words into the minds of others. Outwardly, he thrived, perhaps even more so now that the child who had threatened his power was gone. But in his private hours, when no one could see, he too wrestled with shadows. Catherine's final whisper haunted him most of all. She had known something buried so deep, even he had nearly forgotten it. Sometimes he would hear her voice in the stillness, low and certain, as though she were standing behind him. He drank more heavily, his temper sharper, though he never let his cracks show in public. The town itself carried the wound in its own quiet way. Whispers about Catherine never truly stopped. Some mothers warned their children not to speak the truth too much, for fear of being cursed. Some men swore they saw her in dreams, accusing them of their sins. A few dared to say openly that the Doyle girl had been special, that God had chosen her, and that her death was punishment upon them all for failing to protect her. The church preached of mysteries and of faith, careful not to fuel superstition, but even the priests could not silence the gossip. In the Doyle home, the silence thickened into something suffocating. Her mother grew weaker, her body giving way to the grief that her spirit could not carry. Within a year, she was gone too, some said of sickness, others of a broken heart. Her father, now truly alone, walked like a specter through the streets, unshaven, hunched, muttering to himself. Neighbors pitied him, but none drew close. He was a reminder of loss, and people preferred not to look too closely at things that frightened them. The man who killed Catherine never faced justice, not in any earthly sense. His influence was too strong, his position too secure. No one dared accuse him, though some surely suspected. But justice has many forms, and his punishment came not through law but through the slow erosion of his soul. His paranoia deepened with each passing year. He could not hear a child's laughter without tensing. He could not pass the Doyle home without quickening his step. And in his dreams, Catherine grew older, always older, her eyes sharper, her voice clearer, accusing him still. Kilkenny carried on. Markets bustled, bells rang, children grew. But beneath it all, Catherine Doyle's name lived on as a whisper. She became a story mothers told their children to warn them of speaking too much, of seeing too deeply into others' lives. Some said she was cursed, others said she was blessed, but no one could deny the chill her memory brought. She was the child who spoke secrets no one should know, and her silence in death was louder than her voice had ever been in life. The crime had left more than a body in the ground. It had poisoned the air, seeped into the walls of homes, settled into the marrow of those who lived through it. Her family was destroyed, her community unsettled, her killer haunted by the very thing he sought to silence. And though years would pass, her story would never leave Kilkenny. It clung like mist, impossible to banish, reminding everyone that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, never truly stays hidden. Years passed, but the shadow of Catherine Doyle never lifted from Kilkenny. Her name, once spoken with discomfort when she was alive, now carried a weight that made people lower their voices and glance over their shoulders. She became both a cautionary tale and a ghost, a reminder of what happens when fear, ambition, and silence are allowed to rule over compassion and truth. The town itself continued on the surface. Markets reopened, children played, marriages were made, and funerals carried on. But beneath it all, something had shifted. The Doyle family's tragedy had left a scar that time could not smooth away. Her father lived on for some years, though he was a hollow man. The tannery kept him on, not out of pity, but because his labor was useful. Yet those who saw him could tell he was no longer truly there. He walked hunched, speaking little, carrying the air of someone haunted. At night, neighbors swore they could hear him muttering his daughter's name, sometimes pleading with her, sometimes begging forgiveness. He drank heavily, and the once proud man who had tried to protect his family fell into ruin. When he finally died, few attended his burial. People whispered that he had already died long before, the night his daughter was taken. Her mother's fate had already been sealed long before her husband's. The grief consumed her quickly, and her early death was seen by many as both inevitable and merciful. Some called it heartbreak, others said it was punishment, but those who had truly seen her in her last days knew it was neither. She had simply lost the will to live in a world without her child. Together, the parents of Catherine Doyle became examples of what silence and complicity can destroy. As for the man who had taken Catherine's life, his fate was more complicated. Outwardly, he maintained his reputation. He continued to weave his influence, to speak in gatherings, to act as though he had never been touched by the events of that night. No legal hand ever reached him, for no one dared to accuse him openly. The story of Catherine's fever was accepted on paper, and with no evidence to the contrary, the matter was buried with her. By all accounts, he lived untouched by the law. But the law is only one form of justice. His punishment came in ways he could not escape. The respect he once commanded never felt as solid again, for every handshake seemed colder, every conversation thinner. He sensed suspicion in eyes that stared too long, and though no one spoke the truth aloud, he knew that whispers followed him. At night, when the streets were quiet, he heard her voice. Sometimes it was the whisper she had spoken before he struck her down. Sometimes it was laughter, sometimes silence so thick it pressed against his chest. He grew restless, bitter, quick to anger, his carefully built charm wearing thin. Though he held power, he found no peace in it. His wealth and status could not quiet the haunting that lived in his mind. The town itself carried guilt of its own. Many who had once avoided Catherine, who had whispered about her curse, began to wonder if their silence had played a role in her death. They had turned away from a child who needed protection. They had allowed fear to isolate her, to mark her as different, until the weight of that fear crushed her. Kilkenny, like many towns, relied on the illusion of order, of moral certainty. Yet Catherine's fate revealed how fragile that order truly was. Beneath the rituals of prayer and community, darker instincts had always lurked. Fear of the unknown, the need for control, the temptation to scapegoat the unknowns. In her story became a quiet lesson, one that lingered in the hearts of those who remembered. Parents told their children not to speak too freely, not to see too much, for fear of drawing the wrong kind of attention. The very gift that might have been nurtured in another time, in another place, was twisted into something feared and destroyed. Catherine became less a child in memory and more a symbol, though those who had truly known her remembered the softness in her face, the innocence in her voice. She had never meant harm, yet harm had consumed her, in a broader sense. Catherine's story reflected the dangerous currents of power and morality in her time. In a society where reputation mattered more than truth, where the church held sway over every household, and where men like her killer could bend fear to their will, the powerless stood little chance. Catherine's life and death revealed how easily innocence can be silenced when it threatens to expose the secrets that others depend on. Her killer had justified his act as necessary. Her father had justified his silence as survival, and the town had justified its whispers as caution. But in the end, all had failed her. The question of justice remains unsettled. By earthly measures, there is none. No court ever named her killer. No priest ever condemned him. No community ever stood in outrage for her. But justice does not only live in courtrooms. It lives in the conscience of those left behind, in the unease that follows those who bury the truth. Catherine's silence in death grew louder than her words in life, haunting not only the man who struck her down, but an entire town that allowed it to happen. Her story forces reflection on the nature of power and fear. It shows how quickly morality can bend when weighed against survival, how easily truth can be buried when it threatens those who profit from lies. It asks whether silence in the face of injustice is its own form of guilt, whether complicity can destroy more surely than violence itself. In the end, Catherine Doyle was not only a victim of one man's hand, but of an entire society's failure to protect her. Years later, her grave remained unmarked, her name spoken only in whispers. Yet her story survived, carried through generations as both warning and lament. She became part of Kilkenny's dark folklore, the child who spoke secrets no one should know, the girl silenced before her time. And in that enduring memory lies a form of justice, imperfect but undeniable. For so long as her story is told, her voice, though taken, is never entirely gone. Catherine's tragedy reminds us of the frailty of human nature, the ease with which fear can warp judgment, the cruelty hidden beneath respectability, the silence that allows evil to thrive. It speaks of power misused, of morality abandoned, of innocence sacrificed to preserve appearances. And though her life was short, its impact lingered, forcing those who remembered to reckon with their own choices, their own silences. In the end, Catherine Doyle remains not only a victim, but a mirror, reflecting the darkest truths of the world that failed her.